You can't be serious, Erica. That's not your place, my dad snapped, his words slicing through the heavy air of the conference room. Even after all these years, his voice had the power to make everyone else in the room shrink back, but I kept my chin lifted. I sat up straighter, fighting to keep my hands from trembling as I stared him down across the long mahogany table. My heart was pounding so fiercely, I thought he might hear it. With all due respect, Dad, I replied, forcing my tone to stay steady. I wouldn't suggest this if I didn't truly believe it was the best move for the company. I saw a flicker of something, maybe surprise, maybe annoyance, cross his face, but he didn't back down. His jaw was set, eyes cold and appraising, the way they always were when I challenged him in front of anyone else. But I knew I couldn't afford to let this go. This was my moment. All my life, I'd been expected to step aside, to play the supporting role while my brother took center stage. I'd faded into the background too many times before, letting my ideas die unspoken just to keep the peace. Not this time. My name is Erica Lundstrom, and I was 28 when everything began to shift. I worked at my father's oil and gas company, Lundstrom Energy, one of Houston's major players. Growing up, it was impossible not to feel the gravity of the company. It was more than just a business. It was the backbone of our family. My dad built it from the ground up, brick by brick, and guarded it like a fortress. The walls of our house were lined with photos of drilling rigs and newspaper clippings about the company's first big deals. Family dinners revolved around talk of prices, contracts, and the next big expansion. Lundstrom Energy wasn't just what we did. It was who we were. The plan, for as long as I can remember, was always for my older brother, Scott, to inherit it all someday. He was the heir apparent, groomed from childhood to sit at the head of the table. Dad paraded him around at company functions, introduced him to board members while I poured drinks or cleared plates. No matter how many degrees I earned or how early I arrived at the office, my place was always on the sidelines, watching while Scott was handed opportunities one could only dream of. My dad never said it out loud, but I could tell. He didn't see me as someone who belonged in his empire. But I refused to accept that. If I wanted his respect, I'd have to earn it the hard way, even if that meant working twice as hard for half the recognition. When I first joined Lundstrom Energy, I knew better than to expect a hero's welcome. On my first day, Dad didn't even look up from his paperwork as he told me, "You can join the company, but don't expect any favors just because you're my daughter. Prove yourself or you're out." That was it, the sum total of my orientation. I was 22, fresh out of college with a business degree and a head full of big ideas. I wanted to start at the bottom, to really understand the company from the inside out. I thought if I worked harder than anyone else, if I paid my dues, eventually Dad would see I was more than just his daughter. So I did everything I could to learn. Long, sweaty days at the refineries, shadowing engineers and foremen, making notes about the smallest inefficiencies. Nights disappeared into spreadsheets and industry journals. I asked questions until I was blue in the face. But it didn't matter how many hours I put in. Scott's shadow loomed over everything. While I was pulling together financial reports and learning the ropes from middle managers, Scott was handed a senior executive title straight out of business school. No years in the trenches for him. He went from classroom to corner office without ever breaking a sweat. The other executives whispered about his inexperience, but Scott didn't care. He had Dad's approval, and that was all he needed. Meanwhile, I stayed late, poring over balance sheets and market analysis reports, trying to get a sense of where the industry was heading. The more I learned, the more I realized how stuck in the past we were. The oil and gas sector was changing rapidly. New regulations, public pressure for greener energy, competitors experimenting with renewables. But inside our company, it was as if time had stopped. We poured money into aging infrastructure, doubled down on the same old strategies, and ignored the world outside our office windows. I felt like I was watching a train speed toward a cliff, and nobody else seemed to notice. One afternoon, in a routine strategy meeting, I finally worked up the nerve to say it. I suggested that we allocate some of our resources to researching renewable energy technologies. A diversification strategy, Not a replacement for oil, but a way to future-proof the company. Scott let out a loud, performative laugh and leaned back in his chair like I'd just suggested drilling for oil on the moon. This is oil and gas, Erica. You can't just slap a solar panel on a rig and call it innovation. The rest of the room followed his lead, chuckling at my expense. My cheeks burned with embarrassment, but I dug in my heels. I'm not saying we give up on oil, I shot back, doing my best to keep my voice from shaking. But the market is shifting. If we don't adapt, we'll be left behind. We need to start thinking about what comes next. My dad watched the exchange, face unreadable, fingers steepled under his chin. He didn't say a word in the meeting. But that night, I found an email from him in my inbox. It was terse, just a sentence or two, asking me to put together a detailed report on renewable energy trends and what they could mean for Landstrom Energy. It wasn't exactly a glowing endorsement of my ideas, but it was the first time he'd ever asked for my input on something that really mattered. For once, my voice had reached him. That email became my lifeline. I threw myself into the research, working late into the night, talking to industry experts, analyzing competitors, reading every report and white paper I could get my hands on. I built models, ran projections, and tried to anticipate every question he might throw at me. Every spare moment went into making that report bulletproof. When I finally handed it to him, my hands were shaking just a little. He flipped through the pages in silence, brow furrowed. "This is thorough," he said at last, his voice surprisingly even. "I'll need to take a closer look and get back to you." Not exactly high praise, but it was more than I'd gotten before. Kept me going. Weeks passed, and I started to think maybe he'd shelved my report, like so many other suggestions before it. Then, one day, I heard him present some of my findings in a board meeting. He didn't mention my name, didn't give me any credit, but the words were mine. I recognized the data, the arguments, the phrasing. For the first time, my work was shaping the direction of Landstrom Energy, even if nobody else knew it. That small, secret victory lit a fire in me. I realized that if I wanted to change things, if I wanted to build a place for myself in this company, I couldn't count on anyone to give me permission. I'd have to keep pushing, keep proving myself, even if it meant working in the shadows. Over the next 6 years, I poured everything I had into Landstrom Energy. Promotions didn't just come to me. I had to fight tooth and nail for every single one. While Scott glided from one leadership role to the next, I had to claw my way up, jumping through hoops and over hurdles, my achievements scrutinized in ways his never were. I learned to anticipate every possible objection, to back up every idea with hard data, to win allies quietly and build coalitions among the people who actually kept the company running. I learned that respect in this world wasn't given. It was seized, one small victory at a time. By the time I turned 25, I had seen every part of the company. Field operations, finance, project management, regulatory affairs. I'd traveled to remote drilling sites in West Texas, negotiated with suppliers in boardrooms where I was the only woman, and navigated the delicate politics of Houston's energy elite. I'd made mistakes, and I'd learned from them, sometimes the hard way. But gradually, I earned a reputation as someone who got things done, someone who could find a way forward when others got stuck. I built relationships with people who'd been at the company longer than I'd been alive, listened to their stories, and made it clear I respected the work they did. Little by little, doors opened. None of it was easy. There were nights I went home exhausted, questioning whether any of it was worth it. But every time I thought about quitting, I remembered that conference room, my father's voice cutting through the air, and I resolved to push harder. I wanted to prove, not just to him but to myself, that I belonged at Landstrom Energy, that I could help lead it into a future the rest of the family could barely imagine. And I knew the only way forward was to keep fighting, to keep speaking up, and to refuse to let anyone, especially my own father, define what I was capable of. I started my career leading small projects, navigating tight budgets, and trying to establish myself in a world that didn't exactly roll out the welcome mat for women, especially not for the boss's daughter. Every morning I put on my armor. Attention to detail, a relentless work ethic, and a drive to earn respect from colleagues who seemed determined to measure me against standards they'd never apply to themselves. The actual work was challenging, yes, But it was the invisible obstacles, those whispered judgments, the old boys' club codes, the constant need to justify my presence, that wore me down day after day. I quickly realized the company's culture wasn't just about what you achieved. It was about who noticed, and too often, the only people watching were waiting for me to slip up. Every misstep seemed amplified, as if my mistakes confirmed some unspoken suspicion that I didn't belong. When I succeeded, the victories passed almost unnoticed, dismissed as luck or put down to the family name. Eventually, I learned to let my results speak for themselves. I became fluent in the language of metrics and milestones, letting the numbers argue on my behalf when words fell short. By the time I was 28, I'd fought my way into a senior role in operations, overseeing some of the largest, most complex projects Lundstrom Energy had ever tackled. I was close enough to the top to feel its gravity, to sense the weight of decisions that shaped the company's future. But the ceiling above me still felt glassy and thick, a barrier as much about perception as policy. Meanwhile, Scott, my brother and for all intents and purposes my chief rival, rose through the ranks at a dizzying pace, buoyed less by merit than by charm and the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no. His approach was always about the quick win, the immediate payoff, never the long-term health of the business. You could see the cracks forming in his team, the missed details, the fraying trust, but somehow, Dad either didn't notice or chose to look the other way. The hierarchy remained untouched, the same tired power structure holding us all in place, until the moment everything shifted. That's the real beginning of my story. The day I finally challenged my father's authority, not in private but in front of an entire conference room of executives. It was a move I'd rehearsed 100 times in my head, but nothing prepared me for the live version. The tension, the eyes on me, the unspoken question of whether I'd finally gone too far. The air in that room was heavy, electric. I just finished laying out my proposal, a plan that would force the company to rethink some of its most sacred cows. At the head of the table, my father sat with his arms folded, his face a careful mask. I'd seen that look 1,000 times before, the one that could freeze you in your tracks if you let it. Scott, sitting a few seats down, could barely contain his irritation. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, slapping his palm on the table with enough force to make everyone jump. "You can't seriously think Erica's idea is better than mine." I kept my expression steady, determined not to let him see any doubt. "It's not about whose idea is better, Scott," I replied, keeping my voice calm even though my heart was pounding. "It's about what actually makes sense for the company. We're at a crossroads. If we don't pivot now, we'll be left behind, and we all know it." My father leaned forward, his gaze locking onto mine with a cold intensity. "And you think you know better than the rest of us, Erica? Better than me?" For a heartbeat I hesitated. He'd always had a way of making me feel small, as if all my experience and hard work could be erased with a single withering look. But I remembered the years I'd put in, the late nights, the holidays spent at my desk, the sacrifices I'd made to understand every layer of this business. I wasn't that uncertain 22-year-old anymore, desperate for approval. "Yes," I said, holding his stare. "In this case I do." The silence that followed was absolute. I could feel every set of eyes in the room on me, waiting to see what would happen next. My father's jaw tightened as he leaned back, never breaking eye contact. After a long moment he spoke, his voice low and final. "We're done here. Everyone out." Scott pushed his chair back, a thin smile curling at his lips. "Good luck, little sister," he muttered as he passed, voice heavy with sarcasm and a kind of petty triumph. I clenched my fists in my lap, forcing myself to keep my face composed. I refused to let him or anyone see me rattled. When the last of the executives had filed out, I stayed seated. My heart thundered in my chest, but I held my ground. My father leaned forward, elbows on the polished table, his eyes fixed on me with a mixture of frustration and something more complicated. Pride, maybe, or disappointment. "Do you have any idea what you're doing, Erica?" His voice was sharper now, almost a growl. "Do you realize what it looks like, challenging me in front of everyone?" I swallowed but didn't back down. The stakes were higher than ever, but I knew what was at risk if I stayed silent. Dad, with all due respect, when I'm in this building, I'm not your daughter. I'm an executive at Landstrom Energy. My job is to do what's best for the company, not to protect egos, including yours. He narrowed his eyes, and for a moment I thought he might explode. Instead, he leaned back, shaking his head slowly. You think this is about ego? There was a new edge to his voice, softer but no less dangerous. It's about knowing your place. I built this company from nothing. I've made sacrifices you can't even imagine. I'm not about to let you, my own daughter, undermine all of that just to make a point. I took a steady breath, choosing my words with care. I'm not trying to undermine you. I know what Landstrom means to you, but it means just as much to me. I've given my life to this company. That's why I spoke up, because if we don't change, if we don't adapt, all your sacrifices, all your hard work could be for nothing. I'm fighting for the same future you are, even if we see different paths to get there. He studied me for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then he let out a slow, tired sigh. You're bold, Erica. I'll give you that. But boldness doesn't always equal wisdom. He stood up, signaling the conversation was over. You've made your case. Now let's see if you're as good at following through as you are at making speeches. He left without another word. I sat there in the silence, adrenaline still racing through my body, aware that everything had changed. This wasn't just about earning his approval anymore. It was about validating my own place at the table. I wasn't just fighting for my ideas. I was fighting for the right to be heard, to prove I belonged in the room where decisions were made. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time I felt something close to hope. I'd stood my ground. That afternoon, needing advice and a sense of solidarity, I found myself in Rebecca Morgan's office. Rebecca was one of only a handful of women who'd broken through to senior leadership at Landstrom. She'd weathered storms I could only imagine, battling for respect, championing her own ideas, all while navigating the same landmines I was just learning to spot. She had a reputation for being sharp and pragmatic, someone whose opinion carried real weight, even among the skeptics. As she paged through my proposal, her perfectly manicured nails tapped a steady rhythm on the table. I watched her, searching for clues in the slight arch of her eyebrow, the thoughtful way she studied each page. Rebecca looked up, her eyes assessing. You know, Erica, when you push back against the old guard, you're not just fighting for your own voice. You're opening doors for every woman who comes after you. Her words reminded me that this battle was bigger than just me or my family. It was about changing the culture of Landstrom, about building a place where ideas mattered more than titles or bloodlines. As I sat across from her, I realized how much I still had to learn, and how much I had to give. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time that felt like enough. So you want us to overhaul the refineries and invest in renewables at the same time? That's bold. Expensive. But it needs to happen. I told her. The refineries are bleeding money because they're so inefficient. We can't keep this going, and honestly, if we don't start moving on renewables now, we'll be scrambling to catch up in 10 years. Every month we delay, the gap widens, and the industry isn't going to wait for us to get our act together. She looked up at me, her face a careful mask, impossible to read. For a moment, the silence pressed in, thick with the weight of possibilities and risks. You're not wrong, she finally said, her voice measured but sincere. This is exactly the kind of forward thinking we need here, Erica. Most people are content to coast along, reacting instead of leading, but that's not going to cut it anymore. She paused, and I could sense her weighing her words. I braced myself for the caveat I knew was coming. But Erica, she continued, her voice dropping to a low, almost conspiratorial tone, this place isn't built for women like us. You're smart, you're ambitious, and you've done your homework, but sometimes that's a threat, not an asset, in a place like Landstrom. It's an old boys' club, and they're not always subtle about it. You can have the best ideas in the room, but if they feel threatened, or if you disrupt the hierarchy, they'll dismiss you before you finish your sentence. I kept my voice low, matching her tone, but letting a quiet determination edge in. I know. But if I don't push for this, who will? The numbers are right there in black and white. They can ignore me for now, but sooner or later the facts are going to catch up with them. I'm not trying to make waves for the sake of it. I just want us to be ready when change comes, not scrambling in its wake. Rebecca's lips twitched into a small, knowing smile. You've got guts, I'll give you that. And you're right, this company needs to change whether they like it or not. If you want my advice, don't let them see you hesitate. Be relentless. It's exhausting and it's not always fair, but it's the only way to survive here. And remember, sometimes it's about picking your moments, finding that opening and driving your point home, no matter how many times they try to shut you out. Her words lingered with me, echoing long after I left her office. She was right. Landstrom wasn't designed for women like us. It had been built on a foundation of tradition, cronyism, and a stubborn refusal to adapt. But I wasn't going anywhere. I wanted to prove I could navigate this maze, that I could leave my mark on Landstrom, no matter how many walls I had to climb or how many times I had to start over. The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of late nights and relentless focus. I dove headfirst into refining my proposal, weaving in Rebecca's feedback and anticipating every possible objection. My desk became a graveyard of empty coffee cups, scattered reports, and hastily scribbled notes. The pressure of the company's future pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe sometimes, but I refused to let it break me. I could feel the stakes rising with every passing day, not just for the business but for me personally. I was determined to prove that I belonged here, that my voice mattered. One evening, as I pored over market projections and tried to find a way to make the numbers sing, someone knocked on my door. I glanced up startled to see Marcus Langston, one of our lead engineers, standing in the doorway, his posture hesitant, but his eyes bright with curiosity. "Mind if I come in?" he asked, lingering at the threshold like he wasn't sure he'd be welcome. "Sure, Marcus," I said, waving him toward the chair across from me. "What brings you here so late? Most people cleared out hours ago." He sat down, glancing at the spreadsheets and diagrams scattered across my desk. "I've heard about your proposal," he started, his voice earnest. "Word gets around, even when people think it doesn't. I just wanted to say I think you're onto something here." "Really?" I raised an eyebrow, surprised by his openness. "You do?" He nodded, leaning forward, his interest genuine. "Absolutely. The industry's changing and we can't keep doing things the same old way. I've actually been working on some green tech ideas on the side, but they never got any traction with upper management. Every time I brought something up it got shot down. Too risky, too expensive, not the Landstrom way. But I think we're running out of time to keep making excuses." My curiosity piqued. "Tell me more," I said, pushing aside my own notes to make room for his ideas. We spent the next hour tossing around possibilities. Cutting emissions, boosting efficiency, integrating renewables into existing operations, and reimagining what Landstrom could be. For the first time in ages, I felt a genuine spark of excitement. Here was someone who got it, who wasn't afraid to think big, who shared my vision for a future where we weren't just surviving but leading the way. "Why haven't you shown this to my dad?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. Marcus gave a crooked smile, a mix of amusement and resignation. "Let's just say your dad isn't the most open-minded guy, especially when the idea comes from someone like me." "Someone like you," I pressed, though I already suspected what he meant. He shrugged, a hint of frustration in his eyes. "A young engineer who's not in the inner circle, who didn't come up through the right channels. Around here, that's all it takes to get sidelined. But maybe if we team up, if we present a united front, they'll have to listen, even if it's just to keep up appearances." I thought about it, weighing the risks and the possibilities. That might actually work. If we combine our proposals, make it impossible to ignore, maybe we can force them to see what's right in front of them. So we did. Working with Marcus was a breath of fresh air. His energy was infectious, his ideas bold and creative. He challenged me to think bigger, to look beyond the immediate obstacles and imagine what was truly possible for Landstrom. We merged our proposals into a comprehensive plan that tackled both the financial realities and the technological possibilities of modernization. Late nights became our routine, fueled by takeout and caffeine, but balanced by the sense that we were building something that mattered. One afternoon after a long meeting, Marcus looked at me thoughtfully, his expression serious. "You know, Erica, you're not like most people here." I grinned, half teasing. "Is that a compliment or a warning?" He smiled softer than before. "It's definitely a compliment. You actually care about making a difference. Most people are just trying to get by or climb the ladder, but you want to change things. That's rare." His words warmed me more than I wanted to admit. "Thanks, Marcus. That means a lot. It helps to know I'm not the only one who thinks we could do better." Our professional partnership deepened, but so did our friendship. We started grabbing coffee, swapping stories about life outside the office, sharing frustrations and small victories. He was easy to talk to, and I found myself looking forward to our conversations, even on the hardest days. In a place where so much felt adversarial, Marcus was an ally, a reminder that I wasn't alone. But as things picked up between us, the tension at work grew too. My dad's skepticism hardened into stubborn resistance, and my brother, Scott, was openly hostile. At a family dinner one Sunday, Dad barely looked at me, focused instead on grilling Scott about his latest golf win. The air was thick with unspoken judgments and old resentments. "Did you see the proposal Erica's been working on?" my mom asked, her voice bright, trying to bring me into the conversation, to bridge the gulf that had opened between us. Dad waved her off, not bothering to hide his impatience. "It's ambitious, but unrealistic. We have a way of doing things that works. We don't need to reinvent the wheel every time someone gets a new idea." I felt that old sting of frustration, the familiar ache of being dismissed before I'd even had a chance to make my case. "Dad, with all due respect, hanging on to old ways isn't going to keep us afloat forever. The world is changing whether we like it or not." Scott rolled his eyes, a smirk twisting his mouth. "Here we go again. Little sister thinks she knows better than the rest of us. Maybe you should try listening for once instead of lecturing." I took a deep breath, refusing to let him get to me. I reminded myself that every step forward in this place was hard one, that change never came easy, especially in families, and especially in companies built on tradition. But I wasn't backing down, not this time. I had something worth fighting for. A vision for a better Landstrom, and the conviction that, together, we could make it real. Look, all I was saying was that we should at least talk about ways to protect our future. The words hung in the air, heavier than I intended. My dad put down his fork, the clink echoing around the dining room, and shot me that look, stern, unyielding, the same look that used to silence me when I was a child. "Enough, Erica. This isn't the time or the place." I glanced around the table, searching for a sympathetic face, but found only tightly drawn expressions. Mom focused on her plate, my brother Scott stared at his glass, and even my younger sister seemed to shrink into her chair. An invisible wall separated me from the rest of them. It didn't matter how carefully I chose my words or how hard I tried to bridge the gap. I still felt like an outsider in my own family, a stranger sitting at a table I'd known my whole life. Later that night, the emptiness lingered, pressing in on me until I finally called Rebecca. "I don't know how much more of this I can take," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's like talking to a brick wall. No matter what I say, I can't get through to them. They don't want to hear it." "Change is never easy," Rebecca replied, her tone gentle but unwavering. "Especially with family. But remember why you're doing this. It's not just about them. It's for everyone who counts on this company. The people who work for you, the families who depend on those paychecks, the communities that would be devastated if things fell apart." Her words struck something deep inside me. She was right. This wasn't just about earning my family's approval, or proving that I could lead. It was bigger than that, About making sure that the company my grandfather built, the one my dad poured his life into, could survive in a world that was changing faster than any of us wanted to admit. The next morning, I woke up with new resolve. If my dad wouldn't listen, maybe the board would. I scheduled a meeting, spent hours refining the presentation, and when the time came, Marcus and Rebecca flanked me as I laid out our plan. I walked them through the numbers, the projections, the tangible benefits. I anticipated every question, every doubt. When I finished, the room was silent, the kind of quiet that means people are really thinking. Finally, one of the board members, Mrs. Hahn, who rarely spoke unless she had something worth saying, cleared her throat. "This is impressive," she said. "You've given us a lot to think about." Her words seemed to open the floodgates. A few others nodded, murmuring their agreement, while others scribbled notes. My dad sat rigid, arms crossed, the set of his jaw betraying his frustration. And Scott, well, he looked like he was about to explode, barely containing his objections. After the meeting, Dad summoned me to his office. The air was thick with tension. "You're pushing boundaries," he said, his words clipped. "Maybe it's time somebody did," I replied, my anger and fear mixing together. "I care about this company as much as you do. I'm not here to undermine you. I want to help secure our future. All of us." He stared at me for what felt like forever, his gaze searching my face for something. Sincerity, maybe, or just the stubbornness he knew all too well. "You're determined, I'll give you that. So, you'll consider the proposal." "Press." "I didn't say that," he answered, as guarded as ever. "But maybe it's worth talking about some more." It wasn't a victory, but it was a crack in the wall, the first hint that things might be able to change. The weeks that followed were a blur of meetings, negotiations, and late nights. The board approved a pilot program to modernize one of our oldest refineries, and the early results exceeded every expectation. Operational costs dropped, efficiency shot up, and for the first time in years, employees started to believe real change was possible. Even some of the old-school executives who had once dismissed me as naive were beginning to come around. The mood in the company shifted, small at first, then unmistakable. One evening, as I was leaving the office, exhausted but hopeful, I bumped into Dad in the lobby. He hesitated, then asked, "Heading home?" "Yeah." "Long day," I replied, searching his face for a sign of what he was thinking. He looked at me, almost as if seeing me for the first time in years. I wanted to say, "You've done good work. The board is impressed." His acknowledgement took me by surprise. "Thank you, Dad," I managed, my voice catching. He nodded, a hint of a smile softening his features. "Maybe it's time we started working together, instead of against each other." For the first time I felt something shift, not just in him but in me. A spark of mutual respect, fragile but real, flickered between us. It was what I'd been chasing for so long, what I'd almost given up on. That night I met Marcus for a drink at our usual spot. The city lights reflected in his glasses as he listened to me recount every detail. "Sounds like progress," he said, raising his glass in a quiet toast. "Slowly but surely," I agreed, feeling the weight of the past few months ease just a little. He studied me, thoughtful. "You know, Erica, you've changed a lot around here. Not just the company, you've given people like me a voice. People who used to feel invisible." His words warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," I told him, meaning every word. He reached across the table, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. "Here's to new beginnings. For all of us." Looking into his eyes, I felt hope blooming inside me, a hope I hadn't dared to let myself feel in a long time. Maybe, just maybe, things were finally coming together. Months went by, and the changes we'd put in place at Energy didn't just stick, they flourished. The upgraded refinery outperformed every projection. Costs went down, efficiency soared, and the success of the pilot forced even the most stubborn board members to reconsider their resistance. Scott stopped openly shooting down my ideas, though I could still see the skepticism written all over his face in meetings. The atmosphere in the company was different. People talked about the future with excitement, not just anxiety. Dad, though, was still a mystery. He brought me into more strategic conversations, asked for my input more often, but he kept his cards close. He never fully endorsed me, never gave me the kind of open praise I'd always craved. I could feel him struggling with it, torn between pride and fear, wrestling with the idea that the daughter he'd tried to protect might be the one to carry things forward. For every step we took together, there was always a shadow of hesitation, like admitting I was right would cost him something he wasn't ready to give up. One afternoon, Rebecca dropped by my office, breezing in with her usual energy. She settled into the chair across from me and watched me for a moment before speaking. "You know he's testing you, right?" she said, folding her hands in her lap. "I figured," I replied, rubbing my temples. "But what more does he need? The results are right there." Rebecca smiled, an understanding glint in her eyes. "It's not just about numbers, Erica. For your dad, it never was. It's about trust, about legacy. You're proving yourself to the board, the employees, even the market. But your dad, this is personal. He needs to know you're not just capable of running this company. He needs to believe you understand what it means to carry everything he's built, everything he's sacrificed." I leaned back, letting her words sink in. "And how am I supposed to show him that?" She stood, smoothing her blazer, ready to head to her next meeting. "Keep doing what you're doing. Show him you're here to lead, not just take over. That you're building on what he started, not tearing it down. There's a difference." Those words followed me through the days and weeks that came next, echoing in my mind every time another obstacle appeared. The family politics, the old grudges, the endless balancing act between tradition and progress. It was exhausting, but I kept going. And bit by bit, the distance between my dad and me started to close. He asked for my opinion more, listened more carefully, started to share the responsibility of leadership instead of guarding it like a secret. It wasn't a breakthrough, not yet, but for the first time I felt like we were moving forward, not just as colleagues but as a family. And that, I realized, was the real victory I'd been working toward all along. Sometimes, in meetings, my dad would actually defer to me. It didn't happen all the time, and it wasn't as if he'd woken up one day a changed man, but each time it did, I felt a subtle shift. Progress wasn't a tidal wave. It was more like the slow melting of ice. The real breakthrough came during a quarterly review, a high-stakes meeting that put us face-to-face with our top investors, the kind who could make or break the company with a single nod. Tension hung in the air, thick as Houston humidity. Out of nowhere, one investor leaned forward, sharp as ever, and started drilling us about Landstrom Energy's future. "The industry's changing," he said. "Are you prepared for what's next?" I opened my mouth, ready to launch into my plan, but my dad beat me to it. He turned to the table, his voice steady. "Erica's leading the charge on that," he said, nodding toward me. "Her work modernizing our refineries, pushing into renewables, it's already delivering results. I trust her vision to move us forward." The room went silent. The investors, who'd always looked to my dad as the authority, shifted their gaze to me. For a moment, I saw something new in their eyes, a flicker of curiosity, maybe even respect. But what really struck me was my dad's expression. For the first time, there was a genuine pride there, not just in what I'd achieved, but in who I was becoming. It was like he was really seeing me, not just as his daughter or a junior executive, but as a leader. After the meeting, as we walked out together, he put a hand on my shoulder. "You've earned it, Erica," he said, his voice soft in a way I rarely heard. "Every bit of it." I replayed those words in my mind long after he'd gone home. They weren't shouted from a stage. There was no company-wide announcement or ceremonial passing of the torch. But in that quiet moment, something foundational shifted between us. I felt for the first time like I truly belonged, not just at Landstrom Energy but in his eyes. That night I told Marcus about it over takeout and a glass of wine. He listened, a smile tugging at his lips. "So what happens now?" he asked. I considered it, feeling a thrill of anticipation. "I keep going," I said. "This isn't the end. There's so much more to do." A year later, it was like living in a new world. The board didn't just approve my modernization plan, they backed it unanimously. Our investments into renewables and cleaner technology began to pay off. The company started growing in directions most of the old guard never could have imagined. Investors, once skeptical, started to see Landstrom Energy not as a relic of the past, but as a pioneer ready for the future. The press even started writing stories about us as a company to watch in the race for sustainable energy. That was something I'd only dreamed about. Scott, who had always relied on his last name and connections, couldn't keep up with the pace of change. He gradually receded into a figurehead position, clinging to his title but offering little substance. My dad stopped shielding him, recognizing that what the company needed were real leaders, people willing to work, adapt, and take risks, not just those born with the right surname. Then one evening my dad called me into his office. It was late, the building mostly empty, the city lights glowing beyond the window. He looked older in that moment, all the years of leadership and stress showing in his face. "Sit down, Erica," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I sat, heart pounding, bracing for what might come. He leaned in, elbows on the desk. "You've proved me wrong," he said, his tone both serious and strangely gentle. "Again and again. You've shown you're not just capable, you're ready to lead." I stayed silent, letting the weight of his words settle. "I've thought about this for a long time," he continued. "At the next board meeting, I'm stepping down as CEO. I'll recommend you as my successor." The words echoed in my mind, each one a culmination of years of struggle and hope. For so long it had felt unattainable, a distant dream. But now it was real. Not because he had to or because it was expected, but because he genuinely believed in me. "Thank you," I said, voice steady even though my emotions tumbled inside. "I won't let you down." He nodded, a small, proud smile on his lips. "I know you won't." A few weeks later, the board made it official. My name went up on the CEO's door. The weight of the responsibility settled on my shoulders, heavy but exhilarating. That first evening, I stood by the office window, looking out at the Houston skyline, the city lights stretching to the horizon. Marcus walked in, grinning. "CEO Landstrom," he teased, drawing out the words. "Kind of has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" I laughed, shaking my head, still in disbelief. "It feels unreal," I admitted. He walked over, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You really earned this, Erica. Nobody handed it to you." I turned to him, feeling a quiet confidence take root. "It's just the beginning. Now comes the real work." From that point on, my relationship with my dad transformed. We learned to respect each other not just as family, but as colleagues and leaders. We challenged each other, supported each other, and grew into a partnership I'd never thought possible. Marcus became more than just a partner. He was my sounding board, my confidant, and someone who truly shared my vision for what Landstorm could become. As for Scott, he eventually accepted the changes and found his own path, freeing the company from the weight of old expectations. Standing at the helm of Landstorm Energy, I realized this was always more than just a job or a title. It was about forging a new legacy, one built on innovation, resilience, and the belief that we could be more than our past. We could lead the way into a cleaner, smarter future. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Your support means everything to us. Thanks so much for watching, and we can't wait to share what comes next.